Welcome back to the Female Dating Strategy Podcast, the meanest female-only podcast on the internet. I am your guest host now, Savannah, because Diana and Rose are taking a very, very well-deserved week off from recording this week. So I'll be your guest host on the main podcast. But I am not alone, and I am delighted to be joined by two extremely fabulous feminists and two women that I really, really wanted to get on the podcast for quite some time now. I think we conceptualized this episode probably over a year ago. So I'm really, really excited to get them on the podcast and to pick their brains. So joining me today, we have Jen and Hannah Berelli. Welcome, Jen and Hannah.
Hello.
Hello. Really glad to be here.
Hello, hello, hello.
Yes.
Yes.
Red Femme on FDS, finally.
Yeah.
I'm so excited to have you both on. And before we started recording, we were talking about, some of the topics that we will bring to the show today. But before we get into it, Jen and Hannah, do you just want to introduce yourselves a bit, tell us a bit what you're about and how you came across FDS?
Yeah, so I'm Jen. I have a PhD on Freud that I finished a couple of years ago. And then that thesis is getting turned into a book that is hopefully being published in the next year. And yeah, I guess I came across FDS. I think it was either on Twitter, on X, or I heard someone reference it. I think that it was something like that. I think it was like conversations, like people saying like, have you listened to it? Have you listened to it? When they say this or, when they say that. And so I thought, oh, this is a very popular podcast, so I should have a listen. And then I thought, oh, this is very useful for straight women.
We try to be useful for straight women.
Yeah, and I'm Hannah Berelli on Twitter at Hannah Berelli. I'm the co-host of Red Femme and editor of On the Woman Question, which is a blog that covers Marxism, feminism, radical feminism, how they intersect. I'm also on TikTok, where I talk about feminist topics. And yeah, that's me. Soon to be coming to Substack.
Nice. And I really think it's so great that there is so much, I guess, like radical feminist literature that's coming out in our modern time as well. I think the OG radical feminists, they did a fantastic job in terms of, writing literature and also sharing think pieces as well. But it's also really, really good to get that in real time and also relating to the real issues that we are currently facing in 2024 as well. So I'm really, really excited about both of your books and also your blogs as well. I think it'll be a much needed positive addition to the ever-growing body of, I suppose, a modern day feminist literature as well, because this is all part of history, isn't it? In 10, 20, 30 years time, people will be reading the stuff that we're putting out, just like, we're reading the stuff of the feminists from, 10, 20, 30, 40 years ago now.
Yeah, it's so interesting you mentioned that about original radical feminist literature and the second wave. When you read that stuff, it's really interesting in the ways in which you can relate to it and it resonates with you and the ways in which it doesn't. And I'm always surprised actually by how much it does resonate. I remember reading Betty Friedan's The Feminine Mystique for the first time. In fact, I listened to it on an audiobook and I thought this is about housewives in the 1950s. It's a bit of like a historical artifact from that time. It's a really important book in the second wave. I thought I'll listen to it because, it's the thing to do. It's an important book, whatever. The way in which it kind of really jumped off the page, be living in a totally different time in a totally different circumstance. It was really, really fascinating. And I think what was interesting for me in that book was Betty Friedan was talking about how women in the 1950s and 60s, and I suppose the 40s, when they were children, were really raised with this idea that if you're not a mother and you don't want to be a housewife, that you have like a psychological problem, like there's something really deeply wrong with you. And we could laugh at that now, but that was literally what was taught. Like you have a mental illness if you don't want to be a mother and a housewife. That was really it. And how women would take on this lifestyle in their early 20s and even in their teens, and then when they're 35, 40, kind of have this feeling that something wasn't quite right, that they couldn't quite put their finger on. And how I really related to it was, I feel like our generation went through a very similar thing with liberal feminism, which is really a kind of anti-feminism. actually. This idea that, you know, the more sex with men you have and the more sexually available to men you are, the more liberated you are, the more happy you are, the more whatever. And then women going through that process and just being totally unhappy, having no sexual boundaries, the idea that men and women are sexually the same sort of in every way was also a big thing that I was raised with. So yeah, it's really fascinating how these things work out.
It's like archetypes, isn't it? So in the 50s, it was being a housewife, and today it's like being a pornified sex pot.
Yeah.
Who's up for anything?
Yeah.
But also, it's interesting how, you know, going back to when you said that the young women were taught that if they didn't want to be a wife or a mother, that they had a mental illness. If it was possible to diagnose child-free women with a mental illness in 2024, I 100% believe it would be a thing. To some degree, they even say, like, you must be mentally ill, there's something wrong with you, you're defective if you just don't want that today. And I just fully believe that if there was like an illness they could diagnose women with, you know, if they wanted to be child-free or to not be married to a man, they would 100% do it. And I wouldn't be surprised if in pockets of the world outside, even within the Western world, that is an actual thing, that they will find a mental illness to attach to a woman who is rejecting the idea that she has to be like a wife or a mother, especially given the state of men and dating today.
Yeah, I think instead, I mean, online, certainly, I don't know how much in real life because I just wouldn't be in contact with people like that. But there's just this kind of social shaming, it like positions you as if like that would say be your worth, or like that's the only thing that would make you happy, and as if that'd be really hard to achieve. It's like, obviously we could all be pregnant by 21 if we wanted. Like, it's not difficult.
Yeah, exactly. It's always when people are like, oh, why are you married? I'm like, getting married to a man is not difficult. And you're right. If I wanted to be married by 25, I could have absolutely done it. I could have even, you know, probably had a kid on the way or two by now. Like, it's really, really, really not difficult. If we all lowered our standards enough, you would find a man to shack up with quite easily.
Yeah.
Well, that's the thing, though, that it's hard to find, because what you want is a good husband. And what you would want to, like, this thing about, you know, in the 50s, everyone should be a mother. It's like, okay, but if you're not in a position to be like a good mother or like a good enough mother, this concept by Winnicott, so maybe you're not mature enough, or maybe, you know, yeah, you're going to resent having children because you've not done all the things you want to do when you're young. It's like, yeah, lots of people think in the right circumstances or after I've done X, Y, and Z, maybe I'd consider being a mother. But then there's just this idea that, like, yeah, you shouldn't have any standards for being a mother or being with a man. But then at the same time, like, you remember last week, or maybe the week before now, Taylor Swift came out in support of Kamala Harris.
Yes.
And then, you know, the internet was a bit awash with criticism and kind of saying, oh, you know, she's a childless cat lady at 34, as if 34 is old, by the way. And a friend of ours, this woman, Sal Grover, who runs the Giggle podcast, she basically responded saying, you know, I'm 38, I have a 2-year-old, like the idea that Taylor doesn't have time. And then what it was is, after you accept the premise of women should have children, it became a list. They were like, did you conceive naturally? Are you still married to the man? And if you are still married to the man, were you a virgin when you met him? So it becomes, in the end, this like list of demands that once you give into the logic at all, just becomes like the classic women as property. You know, you need to preserve yourself for marriage with a man at a, you know, fairly young age, and then have all these children. But it's like, so I thought, oh yeah, you can't win. Like, if you've just slept with anyone before marriage, actually you're already out of the game. So there's no point competing in the game.
Yeah, and it's just, and again, like, I don't know why Taylor Swift gets so many people's backs up. I don't listen to Taylor Swift, if I'm honest. But anytime I come across her on X or on social media, people are ranting about her for some reason. And it's somewhat amusing that she's deemed a childless cat lady, when it's like, I severely doubt that Taylor Swift is hurting for company, given who she is and her age. Like, I really, really doubt that she sits alone in her mansion in a rocking chair surrounded by cats. I really don't think that's her reality, just for some bizarre reason anyway.
Well, I think she's hated because she's really loved by girls and young women.
Yeah, that's true.
Some men might find her sexy, or they might like her music, but really she makes music for girls. Like, all of her songs are about almost like adolescent heartache.
And she doesn't try to pander to men at all, like at all. I don't see anything about her image or her music that says, I want to be appealing to men.
Her dancing isn't sexy. It's more like sleepover dance routines.
Yeah, it's fun.
Yeah, so lots of young women love her. And I think she's also just hated because she's like a billionaire kind of off her own back, like her own talents got her there.
Mm.
And, and the thing is, I mean, I haven't listened to a lot. Obviously, I've just heard and absorbed the singles that were on the radio when you're out and about. But as far as I'm aware anyway, she's had various albums about, in fact, wanting to marry a boyfriend. And then he wasn't interested. And then she thought, oh, fine, I'm going to have to, stop this now because you're not wanting to get married after so many years.
Was that Tom Hiddleston?
Yeah, I think so.
No,
Yeah. Oh, okay.
No. It's Joe.
Knows these things.
Joe Alwyn.
Oh, okay. I know she dated Tom Hiddleston, but then yes, Joe rings a bell as well.
Yeah, I think they were together for like 7 years, and I'm just like, you fumbled that.
I know.
But I don't know. Do you think he didn't marry her because it was like very intimidating to marry a billionaire for a man like that? Because I think he comes from like British old money. And they're quite secure, though. They're usually quite secure about
So
they're just like, I have money. And
well, I don't know. Like, I have a friend, my best friend, who is, like a very classically heterosexual and successful sort of businesswoman.
Mm.
And so she's quite well off, having run this business for like a decade and a half. And she would often have to hide on dates with men that she was a business owner. So she would just say, oh, I make jewelry. And they'd think, oh, that's sweet. This woman makes jewelry and sells it on the internet. And then when they'd find out that she runs the largest jewelry training center in the world with like several million turnover a year and, hundreds of £1,000s worth of profit after paying all the staff and salaries and whatever, a lot of them would sort of get intimidated because it's like they wanted to be the star, at least in the career area. And she was like, what a lot of men want is they don't mind if you're a bit successful. Like, you could be the office supervisor, but they don't want you to be the CEO because then that takes the shine away from them. But then the other type she's come across is the parasite.
Parasite. I love that. Types of low value men, the parasite.
Well, in behaviorist terms, this is what this is. Like, they fully like that. They're like, oh, I can be with a woman who's rich and I won't have to work again. I can sit in her like great house. The thing that's weird is a lot of those men, I guess because the way men are socialized, still don't think they have to offer anything. So you would think that man would think, oh, I need to be a house husband.
They just think that they just need to just bring the peen and just be male and that's enough.
Yeah, whereas you'd think that they'd sort of understand, like, I think lots of women do that want to be housewives, that you're like the house manager. You're organizing everybody, you're making sure people are on time for their appointments, you're planning the holidays, you're planning like the nice Christmas events. They really just think like, but my presence is enough. And it's like, well, no, because it still becomes that thing of like, who's contributing what?
Yeah, I just have so much contempt for men like that. It really is. I don't actually hate men. I'm not really capable of hating anyone, I don't think. But I have a lot of contempt for that kind of I'm a special little boy kind of man. It really does something to me. Like, I would take like any kind of really active misogynist, like, I think, over that.
It's almost like different chickens have come home to roost. Back in the day when a household could function on one income alone and it was easier to acquire things like property, and you probably had a stronger village because people didn't tend to move hundreds and if not thousands of miles away from their family members. But women have not only had to contend with the shifting dynamics in dating, so for example, needing to have a career of their own, going to uni, sometimes being the main breadwinner in the household now. I think we did a bonus content episode a few weeks ago where Patricia and I were talking and going through an article that said that more and more women are basically becoming either the heads of household, that sounds very royal, or the breadwinners in an increasing just number of cases, basically. And so we now have a thing where women are not only expected to still take on the traditional 1940s, 1950s duties of keeping the house clean, make sure everybody's fed, being the house manager, but we're also expected and in some cases required now to also bring in additional money. And so I see what liberal feminism was trying to do in giving women expanded working rights, which I completely agree with, and equality in the law. But unfortunately, that didn't translate, or it didn't take into account the ways in which that would change the dynamics in the home. Because if we're giving women equality in the workplace, okay, going 50-50, did that equality translate to essentially managing the home? Because even when women earn more money than the men, they end up doing majority of the housework still, which is just like the biggest scam. Like, what is even the point of having a man around if not only you're bringing in more money, but you're doing more work than him?
Yeah, I mean, all the studies show that. And even ones where there is a house husband and the woman works full time, she does more domestic housework.
Like, what? What is that?
I think there's an unacknowledged, a kind of fact of life, but basically from men's perspective, I think women end up overvaluing what they bring to the table in terms of like willingness to cook, clean, whatever. Because it's not that it's not valuable, but I don't think women want to acknowledge how much men are happy to live in filth. They really are. Like, if I think about what, even as a sort of not very feminine woman, would my ideal flat would be like mattress on the floor, clothing rail, nothing comforting, a single chair, like recliner in front of a TV, maybe something else for like a friend when they come around to sit on, and then just like microwave meals. And I'd be like, oh, so streamlined, so simple, so nice. And then it's felt as disruptive that this feminine being wants to come into your house and put rugs everywhere and make things look nice and tidy up once a day.
Yeah.
But it is actually better objectively for men's health. Like, men who are single and live alone die so much younger. They do just live in filth. They do crap. And it's that they don't have the quote unquote nagging wife being like, do you not think you should do some exercise? Do you not think you should eat some vegetables? Do you not think you should take a vitamin? They actually, I think, end up in a worse place in terms of like mental health and physical health, but they don't acknowledge how nice it is to live in a nice environment as much as women do.
Yeah, and it's interesting you mentioned like because really what we're talking about is the dual income household. You know, back in the day, you used to have single income households. Even if you were a working class person, even if you were a lower working class man, if you were the binman, you know, you were able to support a wife and child on that salary. And that has changed with the dual income household for apparently, I was listening to a podcast recently and this guy was saying for about 10 years, it was great. You were making twice as money as everyone else. But unfortunately, wages adjusted and things changed. And I think what ends up happening is anti-feminists, they see that and they go, oh, see, feminism is a failed project. We did all the social change you want, and women are doubly unhappy. But what is not being acknowledged or thought about there is the kind of subjective, developmental socialization things that happen between men and women, which is, yes, if we had a dual income household and both parties cared as much about having a clean house, then we wouldn't have women doing still double the amount of housework. But it's exactly what Jen identified, that men do not care. They don't want to do it. And that's that.
This is also why my home is male-free. I will never live with a partner, even if we're married. We're having separate houses and separate homes, because I like my apartment to be tidy. And I think it's one thing, right? When it's your own mess, it's easier to clean because that's the mess you made. It's something else. I couldn't imagine constantly picking up and cleaning up after somebody else because they couldn't be asked.
The resentment that must build is just incredible. I don't know how, we're talking about mental health, like kind of psychological burden of that on women is so huge.
You can find some really clean men, but in my experience, they seem to be quite posh men that had like very uptight sort of posh mothers. Because I have lived with male flatmates who were like, why have you left the plate on the side? It goes straight in the dishwasher. And I'm like, oh, he's one of those. Okay. Yeah, I have to do that. And I just adjusted. It was like, fine, I can, not let plates accumulate. I'll put them all in the dishwasher right away. But they are exceptional.
Yeah.
And they are, I think I've only met about 3.
Yeah.
Three.
I've met 3 men that are like clean and tidy to the degree that the average woman is.
And like they were in the military as well.
Yeah, I was going to say military can be quite neat.
Exactly.
Well, this is what it takes men to care about their appearance, their hygiene, their cleaning, is a huge man screaming at them, calling them a fucking dickhead for about 8 months in a training camp. Like, that's not a joke. Like, that's what it takes to get them to do that kind of thing.
Like a Marine, like, demeaning you until you make your bed properly.
Yeah. Yeah. It's crazy.
So then in terms of, I guess, like moving away sort of from the more historical context to the modern day, before we started recording, we were talking about just generally the lack of dating culture in the UK. And Jen actually had a really good point in that dating doesn't really exist in the UK, I don't think, at least not in the structured way it does in other countries. It's a very, very 50-50 culture. That is the default. It's quite informal in a good and a bad way. I don't think traditional courting was ever really, I know it's a thing in royal circles, perhaps, or in the upper class, but it's definitely not a thing for us commoners, at least not in my experience anyway. This is why I haven't dated many British men, maybe like one or two, but this is sort of why I sort of like ran out screaming from the British dating scene, because the courtship or just the general dating culture, just in terms of the effort, in terms of the structure, it just doesn't really exist.
Yeah, I would say, as someone who's lived in both North America and in the UK, there is more ties to like a local community. Whereas in the US, a lot of people moved to the US and Canada. They were strivers. They moved away from their family. They did whatever. They're pushing against the frontier to make a new life or whatever. There's less, what does people in the village have to think about me? It's a more individualistic
They're more
society.
open.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I think how it worked in England, and probably until about 20 years ago, and it's probably is still how it operates in many places, you would go to the local dance or, the party after the rugby or the football or whatever, and your brother's friend was there and he was nice to you. And after you went on a few dates, you got married, and that was that.
Oh, well, I think for pre-boomers, it was literally marry your first boyfriend.
Yeah.
And then that was that. I think for the boomers, it was more like your maybe first boyfriend at university or, a guy you met at work. But in terms of like, I think there's something about British culture and British people that we are more, it's almost a bit awkward or embarrassed about personal stuff. So I find that like if I was setting about a dating campaign, it would be to like set up dates that could be plausible, that have plausible deniability. So for years when we said, do you want to go for a drink to someone, it meant, do you want to go on a date? But if it doesn't work out, it's not a date. And we were really just sort of colleagues or friends or people that knew each other vaguely, sort of meeting up to have a chat. So there was always this like, plausible deniability. And I think that, there's just such a sort of lack of openness. Whereas I feel like in America, at least in the major cities, from what women have told me from there, is that almost like every interaction with the opposite sex could be an opportunity to then end up on a date. So I remember working at the Students' Union shop when I was at LSE, and this poor woman from New York was saying, why are British people so unfriendly? And I said, we're not, but it takes time, basically. And she said, but I go out to bars and I try and strike up conversations with male strangers. And a lot of them just look at me like, why is this woman talking to me? And I was like, yeah, they're not receiving that it's an opportunity to have a talk with an attractive young woman. And she was like, Jen, when I was at NYC, whatever the university, NYU, whatever the university's called, she said, I didn't pay for a single cafeteria lunch because I would be in the queue and I'd sort of look around me a bit, and like the four nearby men, one of them would take the opportunity of, oh, let me pay for your lunch for you. And then that was an excuse for him to sit down with me and sort of have a bit of a date where we could see if we got on, and then maybe we'd go, if I liked him, like maybe we'd exchange numbers, and then maybe we would end up going out. And I was like, no, that would never happen here in a million years, because we're just a lot more closed and private and inhibited. So I think that British dating has gone up a little bit with just the structure of dating apps, because like you all know why you're on there, though I think a lot of the time men are there for sex and women are there for relationships. But at least with that, you know why you're meeting up, and you know that if there aren't the vibes, then, you'll just be like, not meet up again. And I think that has helped. But by and large, it was always this thing of like, do you want to go for a drink? But my advice to the New York woman was, British people have to be so drunk that you would have to wait in that bar until it became nightclub about midnight, and people were like 5-6 drinks in at least, for then you to be able to talk to a stranger and them talk back.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think the drinking culture has also spun, or it's made dating a lot more stressful in the UK because, yeah, like you say, it's going out to some degree can be a way to meet people, or it can be a place to go on a date, like, let's go to the pub. I don't drink, so I always said no. But yeah, like you said, it does take a while for the British nightlife to pick up, if it ever even does. Like when I was out in Birmingham with some friends a few months ago, the pub shut at 11:30 on a Friday night. We were getting kicked out. So yeah, I'm not even sure if that's even a viable option anymore.
And people don't dance.
No, they don't. They don't.
They don't dance. And people don't. Not really.
And it's like, why don't people dance in this country? She's like dancing away in a bar, or
Yeah, most people don't. They stay seated.
Yeah, or it's singing, or it's a sing-along.
Or karaoke.
They were like, Sweet Caroline. I'll be like, what is happening? What is in nightclub gear? Singing Sweet Caroline. And I'm like, there is what?
That's their version of joining in.
Yeah.
In something collective that's going on,
But I'm interested in what you said about, because I'm not straight, so I don't understand. But like, so when you said it's less 50-50 in Britain.
Oh my God. Yeah.
So is it in America? That's so interesting. Tell me more about that.
I guess I don't know why it's so staunchly 50-50. Even women in this country, they would push for 50-50. And it's weird because Britain, I wouldn't say it's an entirely feminist country, or it's entirely accepting of even like the liberal feminist ideals. Like, I actually think that Britain is, or has been, increasingly becoming quite a right-wing country and becoming quite traditionalist, or going back to traditionalism. But yeah, we have this strong culture where it's just asinine that you expect a guy to pay on a date, even more so than the US. I know there's pockets of people in the US that will say, or who don't believe in 50-50, but in the UK, it's like that is the default. And it's weird because women will say, oh, I'm getting so many low effort men, they're not making an effort, or they're just inviting me out, or they don't plan any dates, they don't put in any effort. But then they'll be advocating 50-50 and be saying like, I don't want to be a kept woman, I can pay my own bills, rah, 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 rah. Completely missing the point of why 50-50, at least at the dating stage, is a complete non-starter, generally speaking. From an FDS point of view, we've always maintained that if a guy really wants to impress a woman, and I've seen this from personal experience and from observation of the men in my life as well, I mean, picking up the bill is the easiest way for them to do it, and they will not hesitate if it's for a woman that they genuinely want to impress. It's an easy win for a lot of men.
But I think, isn't it that on the other side, the woman is then worried that he then has expectations of like, not just like she owes me a kiss or owes me something else, but also because she's accepted this, it means she likes me. Whereas I would think, oh no, it just means she wants like a free dinner and she's playing along, like, or something. I always think women don't want to allow to be paid for in case that sends a signal of like, oh no, I do like you, or yes, I will sleep with you, when they're still checking that out, basically.
But then again, the 50-50 men, they still expect sex on the first, second, third day. So you're not really escaping that, because we've had that pushback before. And I think that it is important to maintain that line that just because you're paying for dinner, you are paying for dinner. That is it. If you want sex with a guaranteed outcome, that is essentially looking for cheaper prostitution, in which case you need to move on to somebody else or to find a prostitute. I feel like the 50-50 men, the cheap men, doesn't stop them from wanting, like a blowjob or like, sex in the car either. They're just as sleazy and entitled. I mean, if they're that kind of man anyway.
Yeah, I'm not sure, because I always say to Hannah, like, oh, like, I've tried to, like, just assert dominance or equality with taxi drivers in the past by, like, sitting in the front seat and thinking,
And then you just got sexually assaulted.
And then I just got sexually assaulted. Well, I thought sitting in front would make that less likely, because it's like me and you, geezer, up front together. And it's like, no.
Oh, bless you.
So I'm not even sure you can assert equality with a man who doesn't buy into that anyway.
And to me, I just feel like if he pays for dinner and is expecting sex, that is a big red flag anyway. You know, you've actually weeded him out as somebody who is extremely entitled, who does covert contracts, who doesn't communicate, because these men who try to utilize these tactics, they rely on women feeling that sense of obligation. If they were up front and said, if I pay for this dinner, I expect you to go home with me, then the woman can make an informed choice as to whether she proceeds with that. And majority of women they know will probably say no. So if they are going around making covert contracts and feeling entitled just because, you know, they've paid for dinner, to me, that is also a vetting tactic. And you found out sooner rather than later that he's a scrote.
Yeah. I always think, like, it's not exactly kind of mysteries, but I think men even feel sort of a raw deal on the other side, even though they're obviously getting a better deal than the woman. So, like, I have quite a posh friend, let's call him Henry. This guy, right, makes 27 grand a month. He pays 11 grand in tax every month. So very well off, from a very well off background as well. And I remember sort of years ago saying, 'cause he's married with kids now. Funny, he's married a colleague of his who's quite a rough working class woman.
Yeah.
Which is really the opposite of what he always claimed that he wanted. He was always really funny about women like that, but it's like, he actually just wanted like a golden hearted, nice, normal woman. Anyway, years ago, I said, oh, you know, have you been seeing anyone? And he said, oh, yeah, I took this woman on like 3 dates. And he was like, took her to this, like, what is it? The Shard in London, paid for dinner at the time. I think that was only like £100, probably more like £200 now to go for dinner at the Shard in London. So he took her on a nice date there. And then they went to some like swanky lounge for the second date. And it was obviously kind of like, you know, like the third date rule of like, if you get to the third date and you like each other, you sleep together. So they slept together. And then he was like, oh, anyway, he was like, it was rubbish. And it was like, you know, spent about 300 quid on her. I could have got a prostitute. And I was like, well, you know, how have you conveyed that to her so that you can't say that? And he just said, oh, I just ghosted her. That like hump and dump thing that women receive, and then they don't know why, because they think this guy is interested in them, and he sort of is until he isn't. And I was like, okay, she'll be feeling pretty bad about that. Whereas he just was pissed off that he'd spent £300 on an experience that actually he didn't really like.
Yeah, I think also the British 50-50 thing, I don't believe you. I don't believe women telling you that they're doing it for feminist reasons. I don't think they're doing it for feminist reasons.
Why are they doing it?
I think it's about saying British people you have a real thing about presumptuousness, and you have a real thing about that plausible deniability thing. Because the second a man pays for a date, it's a date. But if it's 50-50, oh, I'll grab my own drink, you can always say no. And I think quite a few women are afraid of rejection. And so they think, oh, if I go on a date with this guy and he pays, and it's like, oh, we're doing this dating thing, and then if he doesn't like me, I'll be like very hurt by that.
Interesting theory. I do agree with you on that. I don't think because ultimately, I'm not saying every woman wants to have the bill paid for, but at the same time, it's like, it's ultimately a nice, you know, gesture sometimes, right?
It signals interest. Like, I would happily pay for a date. In fact, I'd be pleased to pay for a first date or several dates with a woman I was interested in, to say to her, without having to say it in a cringe way, I am really interested in you and excited by the prospect of spending more time with you. And I'm going to do everything to make that as easy for you as possible because I am interested. Rather than wearing a big hat that says, I'm interested, you can do these gestures. And that's the sort of opportunity. And then, so a friend of mine my friend Ross, who is like a kind of working class guy from Surrey, but like a kind of Marxist. And he's sort of made himself radical feminist conclusions about men and women, but just because he's very smart. Like, he kind of did a PhD on Marx, Oxford. And he's just quite critically minded generally. And he said, I do prefer to pay but if they kick up a fuss, I'll pay 50-50. But I have to offer, and I'm not offering because I want them to say no, but it's if they insist, fine, but I'm not very happy about it. And I remember him saying, dating's very easy for women because they don't have to plan anything. And he was like, that's actually the more difficult bit than just the paying. Because he was like, so you'll decide like a picnic in a park and then like a trip to a museum, but then you have to have a backup plan for like if it rains that day and the museum is closed. And I was like, yes, that's true. But most men don't make the effort he makes, I think, about things like A plan, B plan. And I think my only worry about that, because I think this is why it exists in terms of the world of dating, courtship, whatever, is I want a man who can lead well. But then actually a lot of women don't want to be in a relationship where he leads, but they're looking for a man who can lead well if necessary. Or lots of women are looking to be led.
I think a lot of women are looking for effort ultimately, and somebody who is sometimes willing to put in a bit of graft to keep the relationship happy. And what you often find within the first 3 months, 6 months, 12 months is that the effort that they're getting from their partner starts to decline. And this is where the 50-50 thing goes completely out of the window, because in the time that the effort is declining, it's then often the woman who is overexerting, overperforming, trying to keep the relationship afloat, right? So this is why I say that 50-50, it isn't just about the money 50-50. It also can set a potentially bad precedent for the entire relationship. Because really, relationships should be, everybody putting their best foot forward, and your best can vary day to day depending on what happens. Life happens, that's fine. But ultimately, it isn't really possible to split effort down the middle, especially if you're in a relationship with somebody else. You've got different needs, you've got different, for example, wants and desires, and even like your love languages. I sort of hate how that term has been abused, but let's just run with it now. You've got those different things, and you want your partner to be able to put in the effort to meet you where you are, so you can put in the effort to meet him, wherever that he is, right? And so this isn't always a 50-50 endeavor.
There's also just the fact that, I think because I'm gay, men have had quite more honest conversations with me than they usually would sort of other women. I remember a friend of mine, not my friend anymore, actually, he's a terrible man anyway, but a decade ago, sort of said, because he said, we were sort of talking about body counts. And I was like, oh, yeah, I've slept with a few dozen women, which I don't think is very much. And he was like, oh. And I was like, well, how many of you? And he said 7. I was like, 7? He was like, Mr. like DM every girl in the socialist group, Mr. Like whatever, like trying on all the time. He said, the thing with women is they won't sleep with you unless you pretend that you want to be in a relationship with them.
Oh my God.
And that takes ages. And so I said, okay. And again, it was this thing of, because he said it takes about 3 months to kind of convince them of that you're really interested. And then you sleep with them, and then you can't ever speak to them again, because then they go, right, so we boyfriend, girlfriend now. And then you'd go, no, I lied for you for 3 months. Then you avoid that conflict with them. So that's why you do the honking and the dumping. And the thing is, though, is this guy did get in a lot of trouble. Like he was basically the Sussex University drug dealer, only weed as far as I know, but it's not great, right? So this is who he was. And, he was in holes doing that. And he had a girlfriend who I think got pregnant, and she decided to not keep it. It was like a serious relationship with like a serious decision like that involved. And he cheated on her, and somehow it got found out. But anyway, after the relationship, the kind of post-mortem was these 2 women got together and called the police on him. And his like dorm room got raided. He had to be like a student with an ankle. So this is the thing as well, like men who really mess around with women do often or can get themselves into trouble. Though I think now dating apps have alleviated that quite a lot, because you can be so anonymous, and you can not just have women in your local vicinity that you're playing games with, but sort of a wider map and network. But yeah, I think that I understand that it's about really trying to measure if a guy's interested, and you think, oh, if he's spent $500,000 or $1,000, then he must be meaning this. But I would say that because the standards are so on the floor, so like, yeah, my friend Laura, that I was like, listen to FDS, what that meant, so she lives in like I don't think she'd mind me saying this, a shithole town in the north of England, like the one where I'm from. And she was like, round where I live, no man would go for dinner on a first date. It would be a drink. And the guy who she's with now, she did, I think, say, let's go for dinner. And they did. But she was like, he said that every date, quote unquote, he'd been on before was him literally saying to girls, why don't I pick you up in my car and drive around? And she was the first woman that said, no, I want to go for dinner. I want to be able to have drinks. I want to be able to have like a proper conversation with you in like a nice setting. And he was, he was like, yeah, okay, fine. But a lot of women, unfortunately, if the standard is for like a normal working class woman is that you get in a car with a stranger and they drive you around for 45 minutes and decide basically whether they fancy you or not, women are then very impressed by the dinner thing. And I think we've talked about this before in a space. So like a male friend of mine, I mean, I've not seen him since 2016, but we stay in phone contact sometimes because he kind of calls me when he's in a pickle. But like, he's a very successful man sexually in terms of like just turnover. So he will go on 1 to 2 dates a week, pay for dinner. He's like, a rich guy, has a successful career, he's on TV. And he has slept with hundreds of women through this almost like method. And he's like, you go and you're really funny and you ask them questions and then you say something interesting, thoughtful about what they've said. And then like you invite them back to yours and then he takes them back to like his East London, like swanky pad and he sleeps with them. And maybe that happens on the first or second or third date. But I kept thinking like, why doesn't he just have a girlfriend? And the only women he's ever interested in are kind of the women that are quite reluctant.
Yeah.
And aren't that interested in him. And I think it causes almost like turmoil as to why. But that's the thing that so many women, as much as I think he's in his late 30s now, and he probably only dates like 25 to 34, 33 max. But it's like those women are so impressed that a man is paying for dinner, even though it's nothing to him financially, is taking interest in them, is being funny, and then they go back to his like nice flat that he's built like a penthouse thing on top of. And unfortunately, they're so disarmed by it and they're so like, I want to, this seems perfect, that then they sleep with him. And then he kind of palms them off in a nice way with like flattery, being like, oh, so great to hang out with you. You're such an amazing person. I'm really busy over the next few weeks, but let's meet up soon. And then if they dare if they don't read that as palming off and they get back in touch in a few weeks, he's just like, oh, I'm still really busy. But like, yeah, it was so nice to have spent time with you. It was great. Let's hang out at some point in the future. But eventually they just stop asking because they're like, well, it's not happening, is it? And they tell themselves the lie defensively is he's busy now.
It's so crazy how quickly.
Oh, and can I just say this man's 5'8". All of the stuff online that is like, women demand 6 foot. This guy's 5'8".
I literally tell men, literally just step outside and you'll see men of all heights, being in relationships and happily married. There are some women who have a fixation on height. Yes, that is true. I am one of those women. But there are also plenty of women who will give the time of day to men of all heights.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I just think it's so crazy, this sort of horrible, just these really viscerally horrible experiences women have with dating apps. And this idea that we have in our culture that women have all this sexual choice and all this sexual freedom, and you're so free and it's so wonderful. And it's going to give you all these wonderful, liberatory, amazing experiences. And then the reality is experiences like Jen just described of being like, oh, a really nice guy with a good job and beautiful flat. And then he didn't get back to me. And did I do something wrong? And then being like horribly psychologically tormented about this for weeks. And will he text me back when he's not busy anymore? It doesn't surprise me that like Bumble, is that the one? And Tinder have to come out with ads directed at women saying like, you can't really be celibate.
Yeah.
Like
celibacy is not for you.
I even see ones that are directed towards me because sometimes my like AdSense on YouTube and TikTok will peg me as a man. Sometimes they'll peg me as a woman. And when it's peg me as a woman, I get the Tinder ads. And they even promote it like, you can use our app to make friends. Like, please stop using our apps. Because it's like women are so... How? Like, some women I know have had to go to like therapy like after using dating apps for like a summer just because like the experiences have been so universally
and it's
terrible.
the dishonesty, right? So it's like my technically successful friend, he will sometimes sort of befriend these women, probably partly because sometimes he'll think, oh, I can shag them if I'm having like a dry period in the future. But a lot of them will be happy to stay friends. And I say to him, those women are waiting. They want you at some point to be the nice boyfriend that you initially offered. And he will then sometimes get upset when they decide to cut their losses and they actually get a boyfriend. And I'm like, you told this woman, I'm not looking for a relationship right now, but I'd like to keep seeing you.
They want to keep a haram, like, basically.
And I want to keep every option. And it's like life isn't, and sexual relationships are not a sweet shop where you're like, I just want to be able to have one of every variety whenever I feel like. But he will genuinely be like, oh, but now she doesn't want to hang out with me anymore because she's got this boyfriend. And then I'll be like, you told her last month, I'm not looking for a relationship. Clearly that's what she's looking for. So she was like, okay, goodbye. And it's like, I don't understand like the confusion. It's like, it's obvious why she skipped off. You said the words, I'm not looking for a relationship right now, which often just means I don't want a relationship with you.
Yeah, the with you is always silent, but they'll never say that because, like your friend, they hope that women will basically live in hope and delusion that it will turn into something more.
Or it's harsh and like, it is true that sometimes then you can get like abusive messages, even from women, if you are really clear about rejecting them. Like the same way that men, when women sort of say to them, oh, look, this isn't working out, they'll be like, oh, you're so cold. Women kind of do, I think, the like immaturity basically comes in both the sexes. They will say, oh, you're such an asshole, I can't believe it, da-da-da. And it's like, well, he's actually just being upfront with you. But the thing is, he should have been upfront. Because I said, like, so you're just not looking for a relationship? And he'll say, I would, but it's almost like there's this mythical combination of woman that is just not out there. So it's like you're not really looking for a relationship.
Well, it's an objectification. What they want is a relationship that gives them all the benefits and none of the commitment or responsibility. And in their mind, there is this beautiful, wonderful object that gives them that. And she doesn't exist because obviously women are human beings with some needs. So this woman is always constantly in the kind of periphery of the mind because women aren't actually objects.
Yeah.
Speaking of, we should talk about female separatism maybe now that we're...
Yeah, I was going to say, we've had a good riff about dating in the UK, which is an absolute mess. And I would like to revisit it in a more structured way and perhaps see the comparisons between dating in the UK and dating elsewhere in the US and other places around the world. But yes, female separatism. So one of the big reasons why I invited Jen and Hannah onto the podcast was to give the real tea, the hot original tea on the female separatism movement. In the past, I'd say FDS has butted heads in more ways than one with the separatist movement because ultimately our aims are quite different. So the separatists, I'll let Jen and Hannah take the floor on this because they know far more than I do.
What were you going to say?
Just to say that I brushed alongside of female separatism. I'm like, obviously I'm a lesbian, so kind of by default, like I have a relationship with my dad, I'm quite close with my dad, whatever. But, I don't have that many men in my life to begin with. I kind of brushed alongside of it as I came into radical feminism. But Jen fully descended.
I fully descended for like probably 18 months to 2 years. But the headline is, it does not exist.
Yeah.
There is all of the little anonymous accounts online that argue with FDS. They're either girls that live at home with their mum and dad, or it does not exist. There are not 3 female separatists in the world living together like a uni flatmate house share. There is not a single example of that I can find across continents. Actually, maybe in South Korea, I'll explain a bit about being there, but it's like, it doesn't exist, basically. And there may be like 2 women that live together that are political lesbians, so basically friends pretending to be lesbians. But that's a couple. Like it doesn't, lots of people live with their mum still, daughters. There are not 3 in the entire world. And it would make, in today's, difficult economic times, economic sense. They do not want to do it. Like people actually only in life do the things they want to do and the things that they value, much as they make mistakes with that. And, there's like, whatever, walk into situations they don't realize what it was. They're not doing it anywhere on this planet.
And just to say, I think Jen and I are of a unique age, and probably yourself as well, that we know what the internet is like. We know internet culture, but we also remember a time before the internet. And for us, for at least for me and probably for Jen, the internet is still more real. Life in real life is more real than what goes on the internet. So what happens with these young girls who get into like female separatist communities online is that they imagine in their minds that there's this wide world of female separatist communities and political lesbian projects, or they just think this is on the internet, so therefore it's real. But Jen and I are of the age that when we figured out what female separatism was and got interested in it, we wanted to go discover the real thing in real life. So a lot of these girls who are attacking FDS online or attacking other feminists online, they have never interacted with female separatists in real life once, not ever. They actually have no idea. I'll say to them, where are these communes? I know all the female separatists in Canada. Like I know them personally. Like
there's not many to know.
There's not many to know. There's probably about, how many women would you say in the Anglosphere? 2,000?
Oh,
involved in real life.
That's a very liberal estimate. I would say a couple hundred, and by real life, I mean have been to an event ever.
Yeah, I would say a couple. I know them all. So where does this exist? Tell me where this
It doesn't exist, and I've had arguments with them where I'm like, where does it exist? And then they go, that a village in Kenya, which was basically was one very talented woman who essentially set up a rape shelter, but a kind of Kenyan village centre. And some women stayed and they brought their kids with them. That includes sons as well. It's not separatism.
I was going to say, I don't, from what I know of Kenyan culture, there's pockets of it that's quite matriarchal, especially given the high rates of femicide in the country as well. But I don't think they're casting out their sons for the sake of feminism.
No, it's a refuge, basically. And I've seen photos of it. It's just like a collection of kind of structures.
And that's so cute. That's really cute.
Yeah, it's like it's nice. It's a women's refuge. The other place they cite is another women's refuge in northern Syria, where men aren't allowed to, like adult men aren't allowed to go there. It's for raped women. Raped women's, domestic violence shelters are not separatist communes.
No.
And then there's like a bunch of caravans in Wales with about like maybe half a dozen women who kind of hate one another. There's one in Canada that I'm aware of that's like two mentally ill alcoholic women that hate each other and don't interact. And then there's a thing in Australia that they call Women's Land, which I think it was in the 60s and 70s, where some women went to hang out. It doesn't have running water.
And it's not a permanent residence.
No.
It's a camp. They run camps there.
It's like going for a camp in a field and going, well, we're outside patriarchy now because there's no men here. And it's like they have a week usually of just conflict.
Yeah.
Because it attracts often very dysfunctional, unwell women. And then it's about this keeping up this like mirage, but it's like, this isn't anything. You've not built anything. You've not built civilization. You've not built not a society. There is not a home. Like, where do three of you live together? You don't want to.
No.
Because I always thought the separatist movement was, I know you've got the 4B movement, which we can touch on in a little bit, but because I always felt, I'm quite surprised by what you're both saying, and I completely believe you both. It isn't in complete disbelief, but it's more from a position that I always thought that the separatist movement was quite active and quite strong. Again, as we've had our run-ins with them on social media, but I will admit I haven't, even in the most staunchly, because I sometimes go to events in person in England around feminism and radical feminism, I will admit I haven't actually. I don't think I've ever come across a separatist. I think it's also quite interesting how some of them have conflated being a separatist with being a radical feminist, because a lot of the OG radical feminists were not separatists. And I started to side-eye the movement where they were basically kicking out OG radical feminists like Gail Dines because she had a son. And I'm like, so she's been expelled from being a radical feminist because she dared to give birth to a son? Are you being serious?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing to say, and it's maybe an obvious point, but I think often bears repeating, is someone like Gail Dines is a professor who's written groundbreaking books and done groundbreaking research and has like done legislation and lobbying. She's an incredibly serious, incredibly talented person. These people are a bunch of very dysfunctional, hyper online women who do not actually live these politics in real life. They're not feminists in the sense, let alone radical feminists. They're not doing any feminism to speak of, let alone radical feminism, let alone separatism. They haven't even taken a step on the ladder. Right? They're not even doing what some nice liberal feminists do around abortion or whatever. They're not doing anything. They're not doing anything at all. And the second thing is this term radical feminist gets very confused. There isn't a symposium that gets together and has decided what radical feminism is and what it isn't. It's important to keep in mind that the second wave of feminism included liberals, included left-wing women, and included radical feminists. But after the sex wars of the 1980s, which was about pornography and prostitution
and BDSM,
liberal feminists took over. The feminists that remained critical of sex, what we call sex critical feminists, so anti-BDSM, anti-prostitution, anti-pornography, anti-surrogacy, they happen to be separatists. So they get to say, because they're the ones that hung on, that they now represent radical feminism. They don't. Radical feminism, and indeed feminism as a whole, was critical of all these things before the late 1980s. So it's just a historical fact that these are the people that held on to these lines. So then they get to claim that they represent. I mean, Andrea Dworkin lived with a man, for the most of her life. It doesn't. Yeah. It's not true that that separatism is in totality radical feminism. It's an accident of history.
I think what happened as well is that they tried to change the idea of radical feminism and reduce it to a lifestyle, so that it didn't matter that they didn't do politics. They could just go, the personal is political, and therefore we don't have to do politics. Politics is something else than the personal or a political view of the personal. And I think that for them, they just sort of receded into this kind of bunter-stance, and they pretty much do socializing. And they like to say things like women's laughter is revolutionary, as if like meeting up with your mates and like having a laugh, you are therefore doing revolutionary stuff. But I also should just say, like, the amount of lies, like I would find out that a so-called lesbian, so I just consider separatism, like they've tried to redefine the word lesbian to mean just not sleep with men, which often is just celibacy.
Yes, exactly. I've always had an issue with the term political lesbianism, because it's like, if a guy goes his own way, they don't say he's a political gay. And I think that the term lesbian it needs to be more protected than it actually is. Just because you don't deal with men doesn't mean that you're a lesbian in any way, shape or form at all.
Well, exactly. No one, because men's sexuality is considered real and men are considered to have boundaries and their own like real attraction, no one would think a group of like celibate, I don't know, say very religious men like wanting to be priests.
The Vatican, no one says they're political gays or religious gays. Like, no one says that.
No one would say, oh yeah, they're woman-hating political homosexuals, and actually think that they were gay. It's like, well, no, because they know that, like, we all know that like being gay for men is like they're exclusively sexually attracted to men, but it's actually the women who are so kind of heterosexual, or maybe just lack the imagination of imagining what it would be like to be someone else, that they don't really believe lesbianism is real. They don't really believe that two women, or that women just really, like some gay women just really fancy other women and that really just want to have sex with other women, and they only develop romantic feelings for other women. That's sort of just seen as if that would be an impossibility, and they want to make it that a lesbian is simply a woman who, regardless of her attraction to men, denies herself that or something, and lives, in celibacy or with a friend who she pretends is her girlfriend, or even some of them are a bit bisexual, as many basically straight women are, and might sleep with a couple women, but all of their feelings all of their large feelings really are reserved for men. So that one of the things that I found really strange, because I just as a lesbian thought straight women fancy men, but are probably a bit indifferent to them. They're probably a bit like, oh, if he's nice, otherwise I can take it or leave it, is that these women do not stop talking about men. And they will go on and on about like hating men are all trying to rape us. And it's all just this idea of like wanting negative intimacy with men. And it's like, these women a lot of the time, like men don't fancy them at all. They almost kind of make that, kind of want that to be the case, right? So they'll start like, there becomes this prohibition about like caring about how you look at all. And so I remember sort of people being suspicious about the fact that I would like put, I use moisturizer or sunscreen, or that I want to use deodorant because I don't want to stink. And they'd say, oh, it's because you want men to fancy you. And I'd be like, no, it's because I want women to fancy me.
I don't, and I don't want to stink.
Yeah, it's also just like a health thing. Like, I don't like the experience of myself stinking, but and I'm not lying. Like, when people become political lesbians, conceptualists, they do things like stop brushing their teeth. And I was like, do straight women really only brush their teeth because they're like, otherwise men won't fancy me? But it's not all straight women. It's those straight women who were so invested in men and then were so disappointed by the fact that not every man is a Prince Charming, and a lot of men don't fancy women over a particular age, whether it's 30, 35, 40, 50, and, whatever. That was, at least that was their understanding. And so they do this kind of giving up on men, but all they talk about is like their but they'll even talk about their exes and how wonderful they were. And I honestly thought that, like, yes, some men are nicer than others, but some are, dickheads, whatever. The stories I would hear about how sort of genuinely, and these are the lesbian separatist, fake lesbian separatist, man-hating women. They would say like, oh yeah, I was with a man for 12 years. He was really great. But I read some Sheila Jeffreys and I said, oh, I don't want to have intercourse anymore. And he said, okay, fine. And, he wanted to marry me and have a kid. And his parents had helped us buy this flat. And in the end, I said, oh, no, I want to break up and become a lesbian. And, he was a bit upset. And then he moved out. And he let me keep the flat and all the stuff that was, all the furniture we'd bought together. And they will talk about, and I'd be like, oh, I'd never come across men.
I know. It sounds like, and they all clapped at the end.
Well, but the thing that's weird is I thought, okay, so you met the best kind of man and it still wasn't good enough for you. But then lots of those women in private will like mourn that, and they'll cry being like, why did I do this? It's so difficult to be a lesbian. At the time I was so confused. I was like, what do you mean it's difficult? Like, it just is. Like, I just fancy women. It's not really something I work at. But so many of them, you don't understand, like, they have secret husbands. They will live with men. Like, the head of the WDI says she's a lesbian. She's married to her husband who she lives with and their children.
Is this common knowledge?
It's knowledge within the feminist movement, but because there's kind of this hierarchy and taboo, people don't want to say. But it's like, even like a woman that I was interested in, like, turned out she was married and living in a 1-bedroom flat still with her husband. And I thought, okay, well, I kind of know what's going on there. You've not really separated. Like, even if you say, oh, if we're not together, we're not sleeping together, well, neither of you have moved out, so you're not really separated from each other. And I just think that, these hyper heterosexual women that are so lacking in just imagining what it might be like to be gay, they think then that ground that real lesbians occupy is theirs to kind of essentially like colonize and plunder and almost like usurp us. And then because they also don't invest in their personal life, because often they're just single or they're in relationships, fake relationships they don't really care about with other women that are basically friendships, they have all this time to do feminist activity. So a lot of the time they run things and they're the heads of things. This is because they make it a lifestyle thing. And it's like they have a kind of return. A lot of them claim to be asexual. A lot of them will say, oh, I don't really have much of a strong sexuality. And there'll be all these ways to kind of offset and obfuscate that actually they are managing somehow to not to deny themselves basically being with men, which is what they'd really want. It maybe is the case that it's just because they want a high standard of man, and that's really difficult to find. But that doesn't make you a lesbian, and it doesn't change your sexual orientation. And the key thing they deny is that sexual attraction is an internal experience. They like to go through, well, most lesbians have slept with men. Yeah, when they were young and they were figuring out their sexuality, or as an experiment, or to try and get pregnant. They like to deny that attraction exists
between women. It's quite homophobic when you think about it. It's almost like exactly the same arguments that men will use to sort of discredit being a lesbian and what it means to be a lesbian. Oh, they just need to find the right man, or they'd happily do it, sort of thing. It's quite homophobic when you think about it.
Oh, it's super, super lesbophobic. The whole thing rests on sort of lesbophobic tenets and assumptions. And then you find out about people in the past, like Jill Johnston, who wrote
Lesbian Nation.
Like boomer friend I was speaking to in Baltimore was like, oh yeah, she used to leave the commune at night to go have sex with men. Is it Sonia Johnson?
Yeah.
Sonia Johnson, who was a Mormon woman, who kind of got kicked out of Mormonism for being involved with feminism, declared herself as a lesbian. She wrote all these books. One's called like The Ship That Came into the Living Room, and it ship means really like relationship that came to the living room. And after that book, like a year later, she just said, oh yeah, like I've never actually been attracted to a woman. And it's like, well, but what I've discovered through reading autobiographies and particularly Phyllis Chesler's, which is called a
Inconvenient Feminist,
or is it a
politically incorrect feminist,
which is that a lot of the second wavers that we know of were kind of bullied into calling themselves lesbians, even though they weren't. Because I think it was in the same way that female separatism is just an idea without a practice, they sort of wanted to pretend as if that idea was real, as if then that would make it real. Again, like a kind of social constructionist approach, but a very idealist one that would never happen. So, who's the one that went mad? Kate Millett. So like Kate Millett was basically a bisexual woman who I think did have a girlfriend and lived on a farm with her for a bit, but she was bullied into saying that she was a lesbian. Andrea Dworkin has never had a sexual relationship with a woman. And in fact, she was clearly in love with the gay man who she in the end married. She was bullied into saying she was a lesbian.
And that story about, she married him for health insurance. I've never... for listeners who may be unaware, what the female separatists say when you say, oh, well, Andrea Dworkin, who is the best feminist writer of all time, there isn't actually competition. What they say is, oh, she married him for health insurance. If someone listening can provide me with a primary source for this piece of information, why would that be the case? They both worked for Ms. Magazine. They had the same employer. Why would he have access to health insurance and she won't have access to health insurance? She made more money than he did. Like the whole story makes no sense.
But also, I'm not saying that they were in a sexual relationship because he was actually gay. But the point is that, like, as a lesbian, you just wouldn't really want to live with a man.
No,
because they're so familiar.
Yeah, and no, and she was, and they apparently did try to have. There was some sexual contact there.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
How did he manage that?
Very, very strange.
They were like, we have to consummate this marriage, so it's going to have to get blind.
Well, Andrea Dworkin has lost her separatism radical feminist card, according to the X crowd. So there we go. And this is how just ridiculous it is, right? Because if we went through all the prominent feminists, the feminists that have actually, massively built the house that we all live in, who've paved the way, who've made it a lot easier for us to openly talk about radical feminism and identify as radical feminists, if we were to go through them and look at it from a separatist purity point of view, there'd be no one left. There'd be absolutely nobody left.
But the thing that's so strange is no other movements do this. And the purity thing, it's really just femininity. And I'm just like, why in feminism are we just not critical of this like femininity sort of purity nonsense and the idea that we all need to be ethical virgins or literal virgins or act like these kind of governesses that are all really anti-sex? And I think that, so I've had like correspondence with T. Grace Atkinson sort of extensively over email, and I've had like Zooms with Phyllis Chesler. And from what I can tell is that they really invented radical feminism in the 1960s. And from about 1971, it began to decline, and it was really in crisis from 1975 onwards. The kind of boomers that exist in British, radical feminism today, they are basically people who arrived at the disco after the music stopped, and they have a real vested interest in pretending it was a utopia and pretending it was wonderful and that they have all the answers, because they weren't really there for the main party. And it was T. Grace Atkinson who kind of, I think sort of single-handedly, but maybe in tandem with other women, started this idea of political lesbianism, which had at its heart at the time a sort of nice idea in that lots of feminists were called lesbians just as a term of abuse, right? By like men walking past the protest they had. It was like, oh, you lesbian. And they wanted to be able to go, yeah, I am actually. And it was a little bit of a way to have this kind of riposte. And it was also this way of saying, having solidarity with real lesbians. However, basically, it ended up, again, like becoming a bit intractable and becoming this idea that your lifestyle choices, like whether you're a vegetarian or a vegan or whether you sleep with men or don't, they started to think all of that sort of kind of nonsense. And it's very easy to police, right? If you're all kind of in a friend group and you can all gossip and it can just become a big girly bun fight. That sort of replaced, I think, the political analysis of people like Dworkin and T. Grace Atkinson. And it became this lifestyle. And in the end, T. Grace Atkinson, like Sonia Johnson and Jill Johnston said, like T. Grace Atkinson said, like, it didn't work out. We weren't lesbians, and that's fine. And indeed, at the meetings in the 60s, all of the women there were straight. And then all of them pretended to be lesbians. And it starts to be replicated. I know of a domestic violence place where in the 90s, all of the women were straight, all of them became political lesbians. And today, all of the women are straight, but because political lesbianism's out of vogue, they just carry on being straight. And they have to make like excuses for why they won't date. Where they go, oh, I would like to date women, but it's just really hard in this city. And it's like, you could date each other. That would be happening naturally. Were you actually gay? It's okay to just not be gay. It's fine. Having to say in the past that it was okay to be gay, now we have to be like, it's okay not to be gay.
And again, I feel like, again, women or other lesbians, they shouldn't be seen as sort of the consolation prize because you didn't find a man, which would have been your first choice. That is deeply offensive. And I always rejected that argument. And they were like, oh, you can just shack up with a woman. And it's like, but why are you seeing women as a consolation prize for men? That's deeply... Could you hear what you're saying? Oh, you can't find a man, so just settle for a woman.
And I think as well that a lot of straight women, because they don't think about sex with women, they kind of reinvent political lesbianism all the time. So like that Comp Het dossier that was going around, and I read it, and it was all just about, if you're dissatisfied with men, you might be a lesbian. And it's like, just fancying women, which is really just what sexual orientation is. It's like, who do you fancy? Who do you want to sleep with? Who do you develop romantic feelings for? And those kind of attachments has nothing really to do with thinking about men at all. And so you can always tell who it is that is kind of this separatist political lesbian because their focus is so on men.
Yeah.
And they spend most of their time showing kind of contempt for lesbian sexuality, trying to sort of like dislodge us as existing and saying that like women fancying each other is misogynistic because it's an objectification. And it's like, no, I get that men objectify women and maybe women do sometimes too, but there's nothing really here that's like, doesn't, like women are not the equivalent of like, which lesbians go to, the strip clubs, or which lesbians are using prostitutes.
And I think it's also politically important to see, to get all biblical, you shall know them by their fruits, to see where this stuff leads, which is very often rapidly into a kind of biological superiority.
Yes.
That's often where it leads. And I don't think, and I know men aren't women aren't better than men aren't better than women aren't biologically superior. The idea that there's kind of any race or sex or kind of classification of human that is better than another is supremacist. We should be against that. We saw what happened with that. We had the Holocaust. Like, it doesn't lead anywhere positive. It doesn't lead anywhere good. And very often what ends up happening is women end up being in these kind of pseudo communities, less so now because they don't really exist, but they end up being in these communities. They don't want to think or talk about like social construction, socialization, because they're like, oh, we've gotten rid of the men, so the patriarchy is gone.
Yeah, we're in the utopia.
We're in the utopia now, but they're still very feminine in their kind of destructive behaviors towards each other, and they still love men. So where that ends up going, when you exclude the social construction, because apparently you've done it by just excluding men, it just becomes about biology. And very often it turns into biological supremacy.
And then if a woman doesn't live up to being an angel, which no women do, she's the devil.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And it becomes very black and white, very sort of hierarchical, and just frankly very weird. And one of the creepiest things that I found is that because these women were all heterosexual from like the onset of puberty at like 14, 15, they go back to a kind of pre-adolescent state of being. So like I know lesbian history groups that have like fallen out and not had a meeting for 6 months because they had a dispute over what film to show on a Saturday night for their cinema night. And I thought, I'd pitch that at about maximum age 11 behavior, like immature girls squabbling and then not being able to resolve, what film to show, maybe show all the films if you can't decide on one. And I remember hanging around with, again, like political lesbian female separatists, though at the time I just thought, oh yeah, maybe women can go to some feminist camps and discover that they're actually gay. Because I wanted to run the experiment in terms of observation. And it's sort of like women in their 30s having sleepovers like you do when you are a prepubescent girl. So it'd be like, yeah, you drink squash, you wouldn't ever drink alcohol, maybe there'd be some music on, a bit of karaoke, you'd watch a film, there'd be a pillow fight. And I remember just thinking this was all a bit strange for women in their sort of mid-30s to be doing. And even the way they would talk to you, like I remember I wasn't in a relationship with, but I sort of fancied, and I thought, oh, she clearly likes me back. A political lesbian, yeah, it was my age, so we must have been both about 33, 34. And she sort of said to me once, she said, oh, because we'd like kissed in bed. And then she said, oh, I can't wait to be back in bed with you. And I thought, oh, great, we're going to have a saucy chat now a bit. And I said, oh, I can't wait either. And she said, I can't wait to do certain things with you. And I thought, oh, wow. And I said, oh, what is it you want to do? And she said, I want to build a fort with the duvet and read comics with a torch underneath it and eat sweeties. And I thought, I'm not a nonce. Like, what the hell is this? Like, I don't want to reenact the kind of thing I would have enjoyed when I was 7 with the woman that I fancy. I thought she was going to suggest a certain act or say, oh, it'll just be really nice to snuggle and watch a Netflix film or something that is normal for an adult to do in bed. And I just thought this is so peculiar, but they retreat to essentially the onset of their actual sexual orientation, which emerges at about mid-puberty in their teen years.
Yeah, and I think it's just really important for feminists online, particularly young women, to keep in mind that the internet isn't actually real.
No.
Yeah, it amplifies things, or it can create culture, or can create cultural moments. But just because there's 100 or 200 or 500 or 1,000 accounts on Twitter who are saying this kind of stuff, it's not real in real life. Like it doesn't exist. And the experiment has been run. Their books have been written. There's nothing new under the sun. This has all been tried.
It's also the case that so much of this gets given a theoretical understanding because for some reason radical feminism has tilted so much into idealism rather than materialism. So it's like when I heard about the radical feminist movement in South Korea, I was like, I want to go there, I want to research this. I was at the peak of my women can be separatist, any woman can be a lesbian sort of era. And it was so fun because, of course, I would think that because I'm gay, and I'm just thinking, oh, they could just be like me, I guess. Despite not having the same pathway, it's like, no, you can't become gay through reading some feminism. Like, I could have become straight reading, I don't know, some manly books. Anyway, so I went there, and then I interviewed 40 women involved with like 4B basically, and then there were the 6B who were much more separatist, and that was the 2 extra Bs are like, don't speak to women, or don't do anything, don't like organize with women outside of 4B. And I can't remember what the other rule was. But a lot of these women were very young, sort of. I think there was one that was 30 that I met, but she was really just a sort of hobbyist, lifestyle, radical feminist. All the militant ones were young, of which probably the oldest was like 22. And the thing is what they explained is that because of the economic conditions in South Korea, which is similar to what we're having here, so many women were choosing celibacy anyway because of, well, basically not having enough money to like set up shop with someone and then having a spare room for a kid. And they had to work all the time to survive. And that actually had been going on since 2011. There's a term for them, the something generation. And it's, again, like people in their 20s and 30s that were not having children. And then they also explained that in Korea, they don't have a culture of chivalry like we might have here. So they said, you know, if the Titanic had been Korean, it wouldn't have been women and children first in the boats. They don't have this idea of like male honor at all. So men are much more upfront about the deal of like, oh, you're just going to be cooking and cleaning and I don't want to have to contribute much. And then the women can optionally say, okay, that'll be a no then. Thanks very much. So they said that men are bad at courting. But the thing is now, I was sort of years on staying in touch with them. So many of them have left. And to be honest, if the radical feminist movement, they said it was about 50,000, only a few thousand of them anyway were doing 4B. And they were all, so I went to the south of Korea, and they were all basically living together, but it was really whilst they were students. And it was sort of this idea of like student households. And the ones I know now have essentially sort of softened in, or given it up, but kind of softened in their approach, whereby they're like, oh, I do talk to my dad again now. And then I think the ones who get boyfriends just sort of drop off the internet. But a lot of them would say, because again, it was straight women reinventing political lesbian, they'd say, I'm a lesbian. But because I didn't understand what political lesbianism was at that point, I didn't know to say, so you only fancy women? Because then they would have said, no, I'm choosing not to sleep with men.
I have to say, I am almost speechless by these revelations. And I feel like we would definitely have to continue this conversation, especially in terms of how it just ties in with, you know, social media and the different feminism narratives, you know, that are running rampant on social media. Because I feel like social media has been a godsend for feminism, but it's also been probably one of the worst things to happen to feminism, because it means that people don't, or they feel that they don't need to actually read feminist literature before calling themselves a feminist, when previously most people who would call themselves a feminist, they would at least have to go out and read something that wasn't, you know, limited to 280 characters on Elon Musk's X account or sites.
Yeah, and it's just a final thought to end it maybe positively. It's just celibacy is like a pretty good life option. Like, you can do it. People have been doing it for forever. Historically, about 10% of people have been celibate.
It was like 12.5 at least.
12.5% of people historically is usually the average amount have been celibate. Sometimes through the church or through religious organizations, sometimes not. It's actually like not a terrible option in life. And we have a culture, I think, because we live in a very capitalist, individualistic culture, that people think that the only way they can have a connection with another person is through romance and sexuality. It's not true. You can have a very meaningful, full life being celibate. And if you want to do that, you should pursue it. You don't need to call yourself a lesbian. You don't need to do anything. You can just be celibate. And it's
lesbians are not celibate. I'm pretty sure if you thought, like, added up like the average body count of the average lesbian compared with the average straight man, we would be having a lot more sex with women over a lifetime.
Yeah.
Thanks both. And yeah, thank you so much for the conversation. We've massively run over time, but I think the conversation was absolutely worth it. So thank you, ladies, very, very much.
Yeah, thank you for having us, and we can't wait to come back.
Yes, have us on again. You must.
Definitely. And that is our show. Thank you so much for listening, Queens, and for all you scrotes out there. Die mad. See you next week, or see you soon, actually. I'm not sure next week because I keep forgetting I'm not on the main podcast anymore, but I will see you soon, ladies, on the main podcast again. Bye.